I'm really excited to be interviewing John Ruthven, author of The Whale in My Living Room, this book here. John is a TV producer and director and the only producer to actually work full-time on both Blue Planet series 1 and 2. And he's won countless awards for his work, including a BAFTA for the People's Must-See TV Moment from the Blue Planet and an Emmy for Best Environmental Film in the US. So I'm really hoping I'm going to get some tips from him about filmmaking, as well as hearing all about the book. Welcome, John.
Hello, Rachel. Thanks for interviewing me.
You're more than welcome. So firstly, just tell us a bit about the book.
So it's really came about because I'd done both episodes, both series of Blue Planet, and I wanted to write something about the oceans, about all my first-hand experiences. And of course, I had a bit of time during lockdown, and I got it done.
So tell me about the title. I love it, The Whale in the Living Room. How did you come up with that?
Well, actually, to be fair, it wasn't me. It was the publisher, Duncan, who managed to come up with that title. And I didn't like it at first, but it really grew on me because it helps us understand what it's about. It's about how the whale comes into your living room through the television and how we fall in love with the sea through images of the ocean. So I came to embrace it. And also the secondary idea is that it's like the elephant in the room, the whale in the living room we don't often talk about it or recognize it, but of course it's one of the major animals that's on our planet and represents our planet.
And so I've obviously read the first edition, which I really enjoyed, amazing stories in there, but I believe the second edition's coming out soon. So how does the second edition differ from the first?
The truth is not a lot. It's smaller. There's the two. There is a few corrections and maybe an update or two on something, but essentially it's the same. It's more pocket size. I don't know why actually this one was published first, but they didn't do a hardback. So I think in modern publishing they go straight to paperback sometimes, but they went to a bigger paperback, and now because it's sold quite well, they've gone to a smaller edition, which is sort of more normal paperback size.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That makes sense. It is quite big, actually, thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It doesn't fit on the shelf easily.
Yeah. So there are some incredible stories in the book, including it feels like you've had more than your fair share of near-death experiences. So what is the most scary thing that's happened to you?
Well, it's interesting, the book goes on through all sorts of things about the ocean, different animals. It's quite a list, actually, but I was just looking in the index. But people tend to think the ocean is scary because of the animals. And actually, they're some of the least scary things, even things like some of the big sharks. The most scary things in my book are getting lost at sea, being a diver and coming up and finding there's no boat there, or that you're in a very strong current and you're 2 or 3 miles away from where you should be. And that happened to me one night off Cocos Island, which is 400 miles off Costa Rica. And it was really not a very good experience. We thought we were going to float off towards Costa Rica, and there was no boat, no rescue boats. But in the end, we did get rescued. Of course, that's why I'm here. I can just read you a little bit about that, which is how it happened. We're on a little dinghy in the middle of the night trying to film these white-tip sharks, and it had a generator for the lights, because obviously being at night we needed to shine some light on it, and we were being dropped off at a predetermined point on a little spit of the island which we'd seen during the day. But as it happened, we were dropped off in the wrong place. So this is the bit I wrote about it, and sort of about my fear and anxiety of being lost at night in a current. As the first 2 divers into the water at night, we'd become separated from our colleagues as well as the boat. Earlier, I'd been amused to notice that the plug in the generator from the light cable looked like a standard 2-pin domestic US plug. There was no other support to the cable, and as far as I could see, it wasn't tied to the boat, but just trailed off over the side into the water. I could see a torch on the boat in the slightly hazy distance, viewed from my eye level, bobbing up in an increasing swell. The light cable suddenly went taut and pulled in my hands, and as the yellow cable came to the end of its reel, I was exactly 600 feet from the boat. Only the friction of 2 brass pins in the generator plug held me against the current. and it didn't seem so funny now. Bob looked at me, noticing that the line was taut too. Bob was the cameraman we were with. If the number of things you do right exceeds the number of things you do wrong, on balance, you stand a good chance. Bob calmly outlined his concern to me in a spluttered conversation over the water. So we're in the wrong place. It's dark. There's a strong current, 400 miles out at sea, and there's no Coast Guard. And I'm hanging onto the boat by a plug, I thought. So obviously you're going to have to buy the book to find out what happens. That is, as I say, the most dangerous thing is the sea itself. Well, that and human beings, of course, but you can't really plan for them. Obviously, as I say in the book, there's a fallacy in telling stories about misadventure if the person involved is the one telling the story, because obviously I'm here to tell the tale.
Exactly. I was very relieved to know, no spoilers, but obviously I knew you'd survived because you told the tale, and I was relieved to know it. And I was actually thinking, it would some of this stuff would make a really good film in itself, because then people wouldn't necessarily know if you had survived, which is always interesting. But that brings me on to the parallels between writing a good book and making a good film. What are the parallels, do you think, between those two things?
Well, you're right about story. I mean, that is the number one thing. I think we all get, as photographers, because I know you're a photographer as well, we all get sort of tied up with the minutiae of a good image, but that's not really what it's about. It's about the story. It's about what happens. That's the most compelling thing. Things filmed on iPhones are now up on YouTube and get millions of hits. So the parallels between the book and the filmmaking are quite similar in many ways. You tend to overwrite a book. You tend to write more words than you need, and then you cut them down. Well, that's exactly what happens in filmmaking. You shoot more footage than you need, and you cut it down, and it's better for it. And also just the discussions that you have about it, if someone is kind enough to read your book and give you some comments, or in the professional filmmaking world, there's a lot of editorial people as well who are commenting on it and trying to improve it.
That all makes sense. So I think one of the things that stuck out in your book, I think you came up with two categories of producer. Have I got this right? Planners and pantsters?
Well, it's not just producers. It's a. I was reading a lot of Werner Herzog, who makes me laugh. He's one of the most famous film directors and does some master classes on film directing. And I think he was one of the people that pointed out that you don't need storyboards. He said storyboards are for cowards. He's got a German accent. It sounds good, but actually, all he was doing was trying to make you think about the process. I don't think he believes that necessarily storyboards are a bad idea. I think what he was suggesting is that in documentary filmmaking, you want to be observing everything, and that storyboards kind of slightly distract you because you've planned too much. But in terms of God, I've lost my thread. What are we talking about?
We're talking about planners and pantsters. So
yeah. So planners and pantsers, you're right. So that planners and pantsers are part of it. A planner is obviously someone who is fastidious and makes detailed storyboards and says this shot will happen after this shot, and it'll happen in this way with this type of lighting, and we'll need, if you're planning for diving, you need to get your medical oxygen in and all that sort of stuff. So you have to be a very meticulous planner. And pantsers are people that do things by the seat of their pants. Do you know what? We can be both. Sometimes, as you'll know in your life, you'll be a planner, and sometimes you'll be a pantser. And some people, believe it or not, write a book with an outline, and with various categories, are very detailed. And other people do. They basically make it up as they go along, or they got it all in their head. And both methods work, although probably keeping it all in your head might be a bit much for a very long book. So actually, the best position to be is somewhere in between. You have the fastidiousness of being a planner, and also you have the intuition of being a pantser, someone who likes to see things as they happen, and that's the best of both worlds.
And which were you when you wrote the book? Were you a bit of both, or?
I'm making a very bad joke saying that I'm in the pantser division, but I am mostly. I do keep a lot of things in my head. It's partly perhaps because I'm a bit more, I don't know, have slightly dyslexic tendencies, and keeping it in my head rather than writing it down, it works for me.
Yeah. So I think you've already given some really good advice there to aspiring producers in terms of trying to get the balance right between a planner and a pantser. Have you got any other advice that you give for an aspiring producer or filmmaker?
Well, for writers, actually, and in fact, what I would say is that there's some really good books there on writing. One of the best I've ever come across is Stephen King. He of The Shining, and it's about 600 million copies he's sold of various books that he's written. And his book on writing is excellent. And he points out that most writers have a place they go to write, and they treat it as a profession. They're professional about it. So it's not a question of, I might write 500 words today. I am going to write 500 words today, and I'm going to write 500 words plus every day until I finish the book. And that's how you've got to be. There are some things that can help you, which are going to a particular place. So Stephen King writes in an attic room under the eaves of a where there's a skylight, and he's got his desk under there. So he knows that when he's there, he's writing, and that kind of puts him in that mindset. And you'll probably notice that a lot of writers have sheds. Bernard Shaw had a shed, actually a very clever one, that's rotated so that the sun would always be shining on his desk. And you know that Roald Dahl famously had a shed, and he used to go into that shed, and when he was in the shed, he was writing. He'd have little rituals. He'd eat a bar of chocolate first and undo the wrapper and put it onto a ball of other wrappers until he had a ball about this size. Over the years, you can still see that shed. But the point is that that's his place, and he's doing that in order to put him in the frame of mind to write. And actually, by the way, 500 words a day is probably not enough. Stephen King managed 2,500 words a day. On my worst day, I did 493 words. I can tell you exactly because I use the word count. And on my best day, I did 3,500 words. So that's the best tip I can say is, if you want to write, be a writer. If you want to, sorry, I'll say that again. If you want to be a writer, you must write. It's very simple. And also the same applies to filmmaking. If you want to do some filmmaking nowadays, there's the access, it has no problem. You can be on an iPhone or even an Android, and you could do a little film on anything you want. We had an air ambulance land yesterday near our back garden, and suddenly there's a drama. Although I think something we should talk about is that's documentary. Something happens and you're documenting it. And then the other type of film obviously is feature, where you are imagining things and putting imaginative scripts together, and so there's very many different genres of filmmaking.
Yeah, and you mentioned on your best day, you wrote 3,500 words, and on your worst you didn't quite make 500. So how long did it take you to write the book end to end?
Because it was one of the first books I've written. I wrote a book on houseplants years ago, but that doesn't count. It took me about a year and a half. I think I could do it in 6 months now, having had that experience. And you also need some time. Again, looking at Stephen King's tips, he says you write the first manuscript and you write it all the way through in as quickly as you can, and you don't revise it as you go, because otherwise you'll never finish it. Completion is the key. Anything that isn't completed just stays in a drawer and never gets published or used. So you've got to complete it. Once you've done that first draft, you then leave it like a fine cheese in the drawer for 6 weeks. This is Stephen King's advice. And then you come back to it with a fresh pair of eyes, because of 6 weeks later, have you ever had a good idea at 10 o'clock in the evening, and then when you wake up in the morning, you think, what was I thinking? So it's a bit like that. No, writing is hard. It's a lonely profession, but there are tips, and small pointers which can really help you.
Mm. And it does sound like lots of parallels between making videos from my my limited experience of doing that. The exactly the same idea. You try and do it and you get it complete, and then you just leave it maybe more overnight, and then you come back the next day and think, oh, that was a bit rubbish. What was I doing there? I'll just revise it, and it seems to be lots.
Yeah, but it's a process of revision, isn't it? And the first draft of anything, I think, is Hemingway famously said, is rubbish, although he used a different word. And it's because you have to hone it. You kind of sort of know what you want, but not until it's down on the paper do you then see how to improve it. And that's the other thing, is that getting from a white piece of paper to something written down is the hardest bit. So that's why you just write anything, the first things, almost the first things that come into your mind. Then it's down on paper. Once it's down on paper, it's so much easier then to change it and sort it out. I did actually have a brief outline. I did do chapter headings. I did some notes of what would be in each chapter. So that's half of my planning mind. But then I just let it happen, and that's my pantser mind, just doing it by the seat of your pants.
Great. So did you have a favorite drink or snack that you used to have when you were writing? Did that help?
I was thinking about this. I've come to love green tea because it's kind of a nice sort of, obviously no calories, but it's just that flavor. It's very difficult to describe, but it's a great thing while you're writing, to have, and also keeping hydrated.
Yeah. Oh, very nice. Very, very healthy as well. Very good.
Yeah, I'm not that healthy, but yeah.
So given we're talking about books and films, if your book was made into a movie, who would you like to play you?
Well, obviously Brad Pitt or somebody like that, only a slightly more handsome one, maybe. No, I'm just, so actually my son says that when he watches Fantastic Beasts, Newt reminds him of me, because I keep all sorts of, I keep fish and stuff like that, and I love, Newt who has a kind of a stick insect like Fantastic Beast in his pocket, and he loves little things. I rescue wood lice, and throw them out because they dry up in the house, and so I also, the other thing I should mention is I did a research degree on spiders, on tarantulas, and at one time I kept 400 tarantulas in the university, and I had to feed them every week. I did that for nearly 4 years, and which is slightly strange, I know, but I was looking at their sense organs and everything. But it's very much like Newt, you've got an interest for these fantastic beasts, and of course these are the real fantastic beasts that we're talking about. These are the deep sea creatures, the gulper eel, the lantern fish, the angler fish. I was looking at there's a barrel-eyed fish. I don't know if you've ever seen that. The top of its head is transparent with two green globes, which are its eyes. And so really, if you look at, that's one of the things that fascinates me about the sea. There's so many wonderful and interesting creatures there.
Yeah, excellent. Great. Well, we'll tee up Eddie Redmayne then to play you in the film version. That sounds good.
A bit skinny for a diver. He might get cold in British waters.
Yeah, that's true. So final question, the most important one. What's the best and worst thing about working with Sir David?
Sir David Attenborough, a legend. And you know what? He lives up to his name. And I've actually met him probably a handful of times, but he's always been charming and lovely, very polite, very little ego. But you know what, when I was a young researcher at the Natural History Unit, and I first got introduced to him, he was sitting in an armchair and he got up and shook my hand. And it's that sort of old, well, perhaps nowadays old-fashioned manners that he's a gentleman, and more than that, you can talk to him about almost anything. I was lucky enough to be on a boat trip with him for 3 days off San Francisco, filming blue whales, and we talked about some of his early career, because of course he wasn't just a naturalist, he was also involved in running BBC Two in the early days. In 1967, I think he brought in colour television. He commissioned a lot of shows, The Ascent of Man, in order to showcase colour on television, and that was David Attenborough who did that. And he commissioned playwrights like Dennis Potter. He knew him well, so you can talk to David and you can say, well, what was Dennis Potter like then, And so there's all that history. It's absolutely fascinating, because he was in the early television. In his day, they sort of sent, talking about planners and pantsers, they sent him to Borneo, and they said, David, just go to Borneo and film some monkeys and come back in 6 months' time, and that was in the 50s. And nowadays it'd be like, John, where's your storyboard? Let me see all your plans, and then only when I approve them as your line manager can you go, and that's the change, So but yeah, it's a great pleasure meeting David. He's an interesting man, to say the least.
Wonderful.
There's a scene in the book actually where it's quite funny, because he asked me what I was up to after a voiceover we'd done on a film, and I said, oh well, I've been traveling the world, and I wish I'd stayed at home a bit more. He said, oh no, you love it really. And I said, no, I wanted to see my young family more, and then I laughed, because I was talking to probably the man on this planet who's traveled the most ever, and complaining about traveling. But you know what he said? Oh yeah, I know what you mean. I wish I'd seen more of my children a little bit more, so very humane.
Yeah, well, it's lovely to know that the way he comes across is the way he is. Amazing man, for sure. Well, thanks so much, John, for your time. That was just fascinating. And you can get The Whale in the Living Room from all good booksellers now. And the second edition is out 2nd of June, is that right?
Yeah, 2nd of June in the UK. It's been published in the USA and Canada in September. There is actually a Chinese edition, but I've never seen it.
Excellent.
All
Thank
right.
you very much, John.
All right.